The colonial aspirations that would eventually shatter the British Empire began not with a single clash of armies, but with 70 years of deliberate imperial neglect. This distance allowed the northern colonies to establish a self-governance structure largely independent of direct metropolitan control, fostering an environment where local concerns superseded distant directives. The policy of salutary neglect created pockets of autonomy, allowing colonial assemblies to develop their own political systems and internal administrative capabilities, while the vast machinery of the British Empire remained preoccupied with conflicts in Europe and the Caribbean. This separation bred a dangerous disconnect between imperial demands and colonial reality. As the 18th century progressed, this growing self-sufficiency fostered a new sense of identity among the colonists. They developed established structures for governance and defense, preparing themselves for a future where their decisions would be ultimately theirs alone. However, this localized development did not translate into unified imperial strategy. Instead, it highlighted the deep fracture in the relationship between the colonies and the crown. The necessity of organizing collective resistance demanded a strategy larger than any single colony could devise, pushing leaders to look beyond regional interests for a common cause. In response to this growing military reality, representatives from the 7 northern colonies attempted to forge a unified plan for confrontation. On June 19th in Albany, they gathered with the explicit aim of establishing a cohesive war strategy capable of challenging imperial authority. Yet this effort immediately exposed the fault lines within the empire. Benjamin Franklin's proposed Albany Plan of Union, meant to harness colonial strength, was met with determined rejection by both the colonial legislatures and the British Crown. This failure demonstrated that the necessary consensus for unified resistance simply did not exist, confirming that the seeds of conflict were sown by an irreconcilable fracture between imperial ambition and local aspiration. The cost of maintaining imperial control in distant colonies directly contributed to Britain's military overreach and eventual collapse. While the 13 colonies provided a small fiscal contribution, the true wealth of the empire was centered on the Caribbean sugar colonies, which accounted for nearly 4% of Great Britain's gross national product. This disparity created a profound imbalance in resource allocation that favored distant maritime conflicts over colonial defense. During peacetime, the requirement to station British Army regulars in North America was minimal. Fewer than 4,000 troops were often distributed across the Atlantic for generalized defense, leaving the colonies vulnerable and underdefended against growing external threats. Simultaneously, the financial drain caused by ongoing imperial conflicts in the Caribbean and the Mediterranean eroded the exchequer's capacity for further expansion, diverting necessary funds away from colonial security. The constant need to finance distant wars meant that when conflict finally erupted in North America, the logistical framework was already strained and depleted long before the first shot was fired. This systemic financial drain ensured that imperial ambition operated on an unsustainable foundation, setting the stage for inevitable collapse. The global response transformed an American dispute into a brutal clash between established European powers over colonial spoils and maritime control. As British control frayed in North America, French and Spanish forces seized the opportunity to reclaim vast territories across the Caribbean and initiated aggressive maritime conflicts in the Mediterranean Sea. Rival empires understood that the war was not simply a colonial rebellion, but a contest for imperial dominance waged across sea lanes and contested coasts. These rival powers established naval blockades, systematically cutting off Britain's access to North American resources and disrupting its trade routes vital to maintaining the imperial structure. In the Caribbean, French and Spanish fleets engaged in relentless pursuit of sugar colonies and strategic ports, forcing British attention away from the North American interior toward defending vulnerable maritime lines. Figures like Count de Crillon navigated these shifting alliances between empires, reflecting how the conflict extended far beyond the colonial frontier. These blockades were calculated acts of military overreach designed to starve the enemy and force concessions from a weakened empire. The conflict thus became a struggle where the fate of distant colonies was decided not only on land, but by the strategic deployment of cannons and the control of the sea. The colonial forces, constrained by hostile geography and inadequate supply lines, were systematically broken by relentless siege tactics. The battle for control of the interior transformed from theoretical political maneuvering into a brutal struggle against the landscape itself. In Quebec City during the winter of 1776, British regulars faced the savage reality of fighting in dense wilderness and treacherous swamp environments that choked off every potential route for resupply. Artillery became the dominant weapon, deployed not just to breach fortifications, but to dictate movement across impassable terrain. Consider the difficult logistics required to sustain operations around Montreal. Supply convoys were constantly harassed, delayed by frozen rivers, and exposed to ambush by local militia who understood the land intimately. Coastal defenses along the St. Lawrence River demanded constant attention, requiring garrisons to manage artillery placements and repel raids from hostile forces operating from shore. The defense of these frontier settlements was a logistical nightmare, where distance meant starvation and winter meant annihilation for both sides. The physical reality of 18th century warfare was defined by the fact that victory often hinged not just on the clash of men, but on the ability to manage food, powder, and the brutal geography that surrounded every siege line. The American colonies secured their eventual independence through a combination of localized military successes and a profound realization of centralized imperial overreach. This pattern of defiance did not end a war. It laid the foundation for an ideological blueprint that would dismantle empires across Europe. The success in securing contested territory, such as the Ohio River Valley, demonstrated unequivocally that local resistance could overturn distant authority enforced by distant monarchs. This victory transformed a regional dispute into a universal precedent, that governance was legitimate only when consent was granted, not merely imposed from afar. The colonial forces proved that control over land and resources was inseparable from the legitimacy of rule. This localized triumph exposed the ideological gap between colonial aspirations and the crown's absolute control. As local militias fought for survival against imperial demands, they simultaneously developed a new political framework rooted in self-governance and natural rights. This struggle created a potent revolutionary idea that authority derived from the governed, not divine decree, which became a dangerous contagion spreading throughout the established order of the ancient empires. The failure to reconcile these deeply held aspirations with the imperial structure ensured that military victory alone was insufficient for stability. Instead, it was the simultaneous development of this localized spirit and abstract political theory that proved to be the true engine of collapse. The American experience became the first tangible demonstration that an empire could not hold its dominion when the people determined their own destiny, proving that military overreach inevitably feeds the seeds of its own destruction.